Hi, my name is Wenn Lawson, and I just want to talk to you a little bit from my own story as an autistic person and what I found helpful as in the right way to support autistic people. This will include, because it's my story, this will include talking about gender and gender dysphoria and transition as a trans guy that I am currently today. I hope that I will be able to answer all sorts of queries and questions that you might have, but obviously just a PowerPoint show and me talking to it, I might not be able to do everything that I wish I could do if I were in person. So on this slide, up in the top left-hand corner, I think, that's myself. I've got the darker hair and my two sisters. It was interesting to me that my family tended to dress me in shorts or long pants rather than dresses. In the middle, the small picture there, you can see me with my children who are now all adults. The lad in the brown coloured jumper actually got killed in a car accident when he was 19, but his brothers and sister are all diagnosed as on the autistic spectrum, and my daughter and my eldest son have children also diagnosed on the autistic spectrum, and my daughter and son are ADHD as well as being autistic. We have a number of shared things that happen as autistic people. Autism often comes with cousins, it rarely travels alone, and we certainly experience many of those. I myself am dyslexic, I have dyscalculia. I always want to call that math alexic. Just means I have a lot of problems with numbers. Adding up money and those sorts of things I find quite difficult. In fact, numbers make my head quite sore. It's interesting because I have a PhD and words and writing isn't difficult for me. Although I am dyslexic, I've had to persist and find ways to work with that. I'm also dyspraxic, so you know how most people probably type with the fingers of both hands? I only type with one finger. I can't coordinate my hands. Like, I find difficult riding a bicycle. I can do it these days. My wife still doesn't think it's very safe for me, but I can do it. But kicking a ball, catching things, getting dressed, doing your buttons up right, and all sorts of things that go with being dyspraxic are also very common in autism. And it always annoys me because people expect if they show me the right way that I'll be able to learn it. And if you're dyspraxic, that is a learning difficulty, like dyslexia, a learning difficulty. And I have to go about things in completely different ways. I can't just learn them by being told this is what you do. And as an autistic person, it doesn't work that way either. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Here's a bit about what to expect from this talk. So Wen will share the following from my life and the research that has supported the things that I'll be teaching you about. Currently, we have specific language needs that have changed over time. Remember those days when it used to be person first, the person before the disability? Well, in the world of autism, we much prefer identity first language. So for us and the autistic community, we tend not to say things like with autism. I'll explain this a bit more in a minute. We tend to think of ourselves as we can't get rid of our autism, so we're autistic people. Personal pronouns is really becoming quite a big thing. He, her, him, etc. Again, that's on the next slide, I think. Equality and equity. What's the difference? Various intersections between autism and cousins. Connection, identity, the sorts of things that happen as autistic people that are quite difficult, sensory stuff, are difficult for us to negotiate. That's also an important thing. So language and personal pronouns. Autistic individual, tick. With autism, not so so useful. It implies if I'm with autism that I can be without it, which is not the case. Having said that, though, autism is not an issue for me when I'm in my own home and in my own surroundings. My home is geared up for me. My family know what to expect. And if I need to eat a meal alone and not with the family, if I need to put on my noise-cancelling headphones, nobody blinks. But outside, in the bigger world, people can get upset with us for these sorts of things. They shouldn't be, but they can do. On the spectrum, fine. Autistic spectrum disorder we tend not to use, mainly because as autistic people, if I think of myself as disordered or deviant, etc., it reminds me of a washing machine that's out of order, actually. No one wants to invest in something that doesn't work. So talking about autistic people and our strengths and the things that are useful that we can do is a better way to go, totally. Just a word on equity, focusing on autistic people's quality of life, which certainly has not been done. And when it has been done, it's been aligned with quality of life in the non-autistic community. And that's quite different to what happens for us as autistic people. So that needs to be rethought. Uniting gender under the equity banner. Far too long, women have been underdiagnosed, women and girls have been missed out. There's this kind of myth, really, that autistic people are more likely to be boys than girls. Also that autism will mean lots of challenging behaviour, and you know, for boys that is easier to pick up on, testosterone, etc., tends to mean that they are more outwardly expressive. Girls tend to, things go inward. I mean, they can go outward as well, but a lot of things go inward, and there's a bigger danger, actually, of mental health issues, of eating disorders, of a whole load of things that are the result of taking trauma, because it's very traumatic being an autistic person in a world that does not cater for us. So we need to unite the genders, if you like, remitting gender dysphoria, so understanding it and allowing for it, and building mental fitness in the autistic and autism communities. Now, autism community are the people who are around and support autistic people, families and professionals. We refer to them as the autism community. The autistic community are those people who are autistic. And this is not as a crossroad of indecision, but more a roundabout that exits each in the right way to build prosperity. And prosperity in autism is totally doable and should be expected. And this one's on connection. It's very difficult to build connection to understanding, that self-discovery process for autistic people, mainly because the ways to build an understanding, a social understanding, need to happen differently for us. We build connection via our interests. Our passions are the very things that connect us to a wider understanding. So that isn't what happens in the social world and the world outside of autistic people, outside of autism. The social world is just expected that it'll be reciprocity, mutual, even if you're not sharing an interest. Now, as autistic people, our brains are wired up to be monotropic, to do one thing at a time, and we're actually better at working our way into connections via our passions. The family, country, culture, and our personality and learning style are not a choice. This is the way we came. What we do with this, who we share ourselves with, are usually ours to decide, but this presumes a connection to self and to other. And in autism, that connection takes longer. We're single-channeled folk, so multitasking is very, very difficult for us to do. So we're not going to have those same tools as the non-autistic population has to build connection. I'm not sure, but I hope later in this talk I'll also mention things like interoception, as well as our external sensory system. We have an internal sensory system that allows us to notice things like temperature of our bodies, whether we're hot or cold, whether we're hungry or thirsty, whether we need the loo, whether or not we're unwell, noticing if our mood is changing, and all of these kinds of things. That's an interoception connection to our brain, and quite often this is a little bit offline, mainly because all of our attention is focused on something else. We may not notice, we may forget or put off going to the loo, not notice we're hungry. Those sorts of things can happen because connection in autism is often delayed. I'll read you a poem, and this is more about gender and identity and understanding where we fit. As autistic people, it's quite difficult to know where we fit. I'm just me, and I wear what I wear, I do what I do, and there's often quite a mix, quite a fluidity about my gender. But it's not like that in the non-autistic world. Unfortunately, gender is a very binary, it's a very set understanding, male or female, and that's the only two that can occur, which is not reality. A little girl dressed in pink, a little boy in blue. The object here is clear, you see. They offer the gender clue. The picture of what's right, picture of what's wrong. We see it every day. We see it every way. We hear it in a song. Who am I? But whose song do we sing? Who do we represent? All of humanity, or just the ones we get? What's the guiding rule here? What's the thing to do? The rule is it's different. It's different for me, and it's different for you. And this is quite confusing and difficult to navigate when the world outside of autism says you should be this, this, or this. You know, it's quite funny, really, because they talk about autistic people being rigid, and yet more often than not, I come across the outside world, non-autistic people, who are quite rigid. They find it quite difficult to adjust to accommodate the autistic learning style, the autistic way of being, and so on. And that's a bit sad, but we're working on it. It's a work in action, something like that. A work in progress. That's it. So I know that I was different from early on. I was not a typically developing child. I wasn't talking till closer to my 5th birthday. I was in nappies till I was 4. Everything was a bit delayed about me, and people didn't have an expectation that I would amount to much, actually. It was a bit sad. Yeah, I was actually diagnosed with an intellectual disability, which I don't have. But I think if a child isn't talking, it's all very easy to think they're not very bright. But actually, speech, IQ come from very different areas of the brain, and they're not necessarily related. Those learning differences I mentioned earlier, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, negatively impacted my early learning. So things like being able to hold a pencil, being able to ride a bicycle, kick a ball, catch a ball. I also have poor sight. I've only got vision in one eye, so that didn't help. But those kind of things gave an impact to other people, a picture that I wasn't learning appropriately or as typically developing children do. Therefore, I must not be very bright. But autism has nothing to do with IQ. Even those young people and older people who don't use language to communicate, perhaps they communicate through their iPads or through a light writer or through a letterboard. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have an intelligence. It's just that that aspect to their brain is offline for whatever reason. So very different. And different is scary. People are scared of difference. Don't be scared. Get to know us, get to work with us, accommodate our differences like you would expect your differences to be accommodated. That's helpful. Autism diagnosis for when? Many years of mental health treatment for a disease I didn't have. And unfortunately, this is occurring far too often, especially amongst females who are being diagnosed with things like borderline personality disorder, anxiety, major anxiety disorders, depression, and they may have those things, but that might not be the reason for their issues. It's much more common than people realize that autism is an underlying issue, and because that hasn't been accommodated, then people have felt rejected, haven't understood what's required of them, they've been bullied, lots of things have gone on, lots of trauma, because it's like we're a round peg in a square hole, trying to be put into a square hole. Find round holes for round pegs, that would be nice. Reducing trauma happens as we accept a person's autism and love them and work with them despite of it. I read a book, I recognised myself inside its pages. I read a book by Donna Williams, Nobody Nowhere, and there were so many things in that book that I thought, wow, that's me, that's me, that's me. So I didn't have a diagnosis of autism to start with. I was 42 before I got my diagnosis. And there's lots of adults who have a late diagnosis. It's never too late to be diagnosed if you feel like autism might be what's happening to you, but it shouldn't have to be that way. It would be so much better if people got to know us and understood us, what was happening for us, and could actually accommodate our learning differences. Is it really such a big deal that somebody might need to eat separately from the table with other people? They might need to eat alone? Is it really such a big deal that they like to watch the same program over and over? Might be boring for you, but that might be really necessary for them. So accommodating these differences. Some of the social and sensory stuff is massive. I've got Erlin lenses. These have got a particular pinky colour in them. Hard to see with the pink wall behind me. And a cap that I can pull down if the light gets too bright. These are tools, if you like, that I can take with me into the world when the world won't change the lighting or change the way that they do things. I need to have things on my person that can help me cope. Ear cancelling headphones are another thing that I use, and I've got some sensory toys that I twiddle with, very often in my pocket so it's not on view, but they're things that really help ground me as an autistic person. So at the age of 42, when I discovered my autism, it brought a lot of relief, but it also brought more cages, more limitations, because unfortunately the world isn't catering for autistic people. It wasn't then, it isn't now. There is more understanding, but not enough. So I was confined in so many ways, and I needed to find a key that would help change those gauges, move things that would build a connection as an autistic person. And that came through understanding, through sharing with other people who are autistic. I tell you what, the best people to talk to are autistic people if you want to find out about autism. We're living this experience all the time, so we know, and it's unfair, unjust, and untrue to say, oh, you're autistic, you won't know what's happening to you. We might not always have the words, but we can share in ways, might not be using words. We can paint pictures, we can put it into dance or expression, use clay. There are lots of ways to communicate that aren't always speech. But finding out what we like, what we love, what works for us, absolutely vital if you're going to be supportive of autistic people. Connection happened in a big way for me once I got my diagnosis. I finally understood the reason for a lifetime, absolute lifetime, of social and academic difficulty. The relief was huge because I came to understand that there are reasons about why I learned the way that I do, which are better than other ways that people learn. So being in a big classroom with lots of children, having a teacher walk about the room, write things on a board. This was earlier in my days. They don't do this quite so much these times. Even mat time, when you sit on the mat in the front when you're a little person, teacher's telling a story. If there isn't anything to engage me in that story, so having a whiteboard, having video on the board to depict what's happening, interact with us through those things, checking in. Teachers used to say, do you understand that? Or everybody okay? And I would say yes. Yes got me into less trouble than no. So why would I not say that? But I didn't actually have an understanding of what they meant. So you need to check in, not just deliver the same words, say the same sentence. Find a way to check in on what I've understood. If I can say it back to you in a paraphrase, if I can get up and do the action of what you're saying to me, some way of letting you know that I have understood is so important. I still needed to understand my sensory system and my gender status. Now, these were things that were way off in the future. I was already 42 by the time I got diagnosed, but I still did not have a connection to either of those. And I really needed to. As a girl, as a 10-year-old girl, getting my periods, I was terrified, and I was determined that I was going to grow up and to be a man and this would all stop. So imagine my discomfort when I connected to the idea that it wasn't going to stop and it wasn't going to change. Absolutely terrifying. Anyway, perhaps I'll leave that one there. My anatomical gender and my personality and autism made me extremely vulnerable. I was the kind of kid, and I'm the kind of grown-up too, was lively, outgoing, independent, keen to learn, but I was also gullible, vulnerable, go off with anyone, totally unaware of danger. And I'm a little bit that way. I don't pick up on things that I should note as, oh, that's not a safe situation. So some things I know about being safe. I wouldn't walk off a roof these days. I don't cross railway tracks or walk into the road. I would have done as a child. I know those things, but it's those subtle things about other people. When somebody says, "Can I help?" I'm thinking, "Oh yes, they could help. Can I carry that for you?" "Yeah, of course you can." And I'll willingly go with somebody that is probably not the best thing to do. This has happened to me far too many times. I've got myself into all sorts of trouble by not reading other people, and it is very difficult. I read books. I mean, why would you read people? People talk about reading body language. Your body and your facial expressions tell you things, but I'll miss those things. I still miss them today. I can't pick up on those things because all of my attention usually is occupied in some other way. So there's no spare attention left for noticing those things anyway, but I don't see them. My wife says that I have a boy look even when I'm looking in the fridge and where's that yogurt? She says, right in front of you. I can't see it. I need socks. There's no socks in the drawer. She opens the drawer and there they are. What is it? I have no idea what it is, but I don't notice things, and that's a really common trait in autism. For me, as a preteen, before I was 13, I was sexually abused. I was very young for my age, which is so common in autistic kids. Loved physical games, especially tennis and soccer. So anywhere where people were kicking a ball, I would run to, because that was an interest that I had at that time. Poor at reading, loved poetry, and we had these games, these acting games that I used to do with puppets. Put on a puppet show with an old cardboard box and a piece of material to entertain the local kids. This is when I was very young, before I was 10. And this was lovely, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I would enjoy it today. But I still didn't know about stop and start. If I'm jumping on a trampoline as a younger person, which I loved, I couldn't tell that my legs were getting tired and I needed to stop. So having a timer would really support me, letting me know this is red for beginning and purple for stop or something. And again, that can be problematic because I'm a synesthetic and red for me is exciting, keep going color. So using red to stop would not be good. Purple is a better color for me. And you can check in with somebody, let them choose the colors for stopping and starting. Let them choose the egg timer, let them choose what it is, what the symbol would be when it's time to stop. Because we often, don't notice that we're tired, don't want to stop because we've been enjoying something, but don't actually pick up on the interoception simple signals from our body that it's time to stop. I also grew to feel at home in studious activities. Now, I say grew to because reading and writing were very difficult when I was much younger. This was a passion that developed over time. I still remember the first Janet and John books we had to read at school. And all I can see the pictures of Janet and John and the boats and the yachts and down at the harbour and the lovely watercolour washed out images on the pages. But I couldn't read them. I was nearly 13 before I started to read, as in recognising the words in books were the same as the conversations people used. I was a little bit echolalic as a kid, so I would often echo back the advertisements on television, which was annoying to my family. But if you're echolalic, it's actually showing that your brain has all the right equipment to develop language. So we shouldn't stop somebody. We should join the words for them if they allow us to, never invade somebody's space. But being echolalic is actually quite good. Singing and putting words to music is a very good way to help somebody understand something. This is the way we brush our teeth, that kind of thing. I grew into being able to read and to write and going on. I went and did year 11, 12 when I was 38 years of age, I think. Well, it might have been 32, but in my 30s, I certainly did better as an older person in my adult life, young adult life, than as a child. So be patient with us. I was told lots of things about things I couldn't do. It's so easy to focus on all that we can't. I couldn't learn, I was told. You'd never be able to do this or do that. I've even had family speak in front of me and say, oh, no, Wen can't do that, he's autistic, and please don't do that. But we understand and are listening, even if it doesn't appear like we are, taking all those things in, and those things can tear down self, take away autonomy, wreck self-esteem, and so on. I was told I couldn't learn, but I did. Not expected to finish school, but I did, even if it was later than most. 38, there you go, when I began year 11 and 12 at our local high school, and I had 17 and 18-year-olds teaching me how to use a computer. It was fabulous and amazing, and they were brilliant at helping me. And once I cottoned on, I was able to, I really was up and away. I found computers made connecting to writing and learning much easier than books and pen and paper. At 41, I started university, and at 57, I completed a PhD. I have a wife, a family, and a few friends. That's not bad. Lots of people don't have that. So as an autistic person, the sky's the limit. It depends on how you support us, how you work with us, and how you encourage our... Oh, excuse me, I had a sandwich before this and I've just been burping. How you encourage our abilities rather than our disabilities. Autism, sensory or gender issues, and this took a lot of working out. Sensory connections can impact an understanding of gender. I don't feel like the gender I'm told I am, but I also didn't know how the gender I was told I am was meant to feel anyway. So it was very difficult. I was a female. I was born into a female body. I have some intersex components, but that's for another discussion, I think. So I didn't understand so many things about being this female that I was told I was. I couldn't bear dresses. They used to flap against the back of my legs, and this was the reason I gave for not wearing them. It took a long time to understand it was much more than the way the dress flapped against my legs. The way that socks ended, if I pulled them up, I needed them to be down. So ankle socks, I didn't like long socks. They were always kind of tickling my leg. It was very uncomfortable. But gender is absolutely part of my identity. So gender questioning is quite common in autism. And it doesn't have to happen as you get older. This can happen in small children too. You know, usually 4-year-olds know quite clearly if they're a boy or a girl. In autism, not so much. And it can be quite uncomfortable because I'm just me. I used to use my name to refer to me. As a female, I was Wendy, and it would say Wendy this and Wendy that. Because if I am I, and you say to be something like, would you like? Well, if you are you, then who am I? I'm Wendy, so Wendy would like was a much more common way of expressing and relating to other people, because they were all you too. So if they're all you and I am you, and oh, it gets so confusing, just go with the name. An interesting thing, once I did recognize I am actually male and changed my gender, I never used my name again. I knew who I was and who I am. I could separate I and you. It was immediate, and that's quite interesting. I blamed my sensory dysphoria on my autism, and there is a place for that. Our sensory heightened senses or lowered awareness of sensory information, it can go either way, and it can move between the two in the same day. Is very much connected usually to being autistic. You can have a sensory disposition and not be autistic, of course, but the sensory things that I lived with were connected to my autism, but not all of them. Not all of them. So that dress flapping thing, yes, sensory discomfort, but there was also a gender discomfort, and it took me ages to separate the two. I took a while to notice my thinking, feelings, and comfort gender-wise, not necessarily because of my autism, but because of my gender dysphoria. So I didn't actually come to understand that until I was in my 60s. How do you get so old without knowing? Well, there you go. I wish I knew. Don't have the answer for that one, but it's taken me years and years to join the dots and separate things. And partly, I think, because I'm very mono, very single-minded. I'm very one-tracked. There's only so much one road can accommodate. You know, if you've got 5 lanes in a highway, well, the traffic going down those 5 lanes, they've each got their own lane, and they're going all together in the right direction. But when that comes around the corner and goes down into one lane eventually, we call it congestion. I always think of wanting to cough up phlegm and stuff when I think of congestion. I know, it's too much information. But everything slows down, and it may even stop. And that's what happens in autism, because we are actually one-tracked. We are never 5-laned people. I tell you, there is a time when we are, and that's if we're autistic and ADHD. Then you've got a kind of circular monotropism that's going round and round, and it's usually one thing at a time with our fingers in lots of pies, never finishing one. Executive functioning is very difficult, and so many other things are quite hard to organise, and actually can be quite difficult to cope with at times. But yeah, that is a very different thing. It took a while to notice my thinking, to sort out gender and sensory stuff. And we need to sort it out because they're very important. Getting lost in the detail. This is so autistic. Did I say that? Discovering who I am, though, not what I can do, took much longer. My autism helps me to focus upon things that interest me, such as research, writing, and poetry, as an adult, but it also meant I often couldn't connect to the wider picture of self and of other. Separating yours, mine, theirs, ours, common understandings that I took such a long time to grasp. I'm trying to stop the computer shaking because it's on my lap, because I'm in the bedroom where it's a bit quieter. So forgive me if this wobbles a bit, but imagine this little case here was on your desk, and Wen liked the colour, and I do, so Wen picks this up and has it. Imagine if you said, that's not yours, and I said, but I have it. I know you have it, but it's not yours. Oh, hang on. It is mine because I have it. No, it's not yours, but I have it. Can you see the difficulty here? What the person means is, I know you like the colour, I know you picked that up and you're now holding it, but it was never yours to begin with. It belonged to somebody else and they didn't give you permission to have it, so put it back, please. It's quite difficult to negotiate because people in the non-autistic world use a lot of metaphor to explain things, and metaphor in autism is quite difficult to grasp sometimes. I remember teachers saying, sit down and sit up. I'm thinking, which one does she want me to do? And I just stood there. So then I got told off for being naughty. But how can you be up and down? Never mind. So when I was 16, I met a boy, and he had an amazing motorbike, and I fell in love with his motorbike, actually. But he was a nice bloke, and he used to take me on the back of his bike. And one day, the pastor at church said, you two, you're like an old married couple. I said, we're not married. He said, well, you should be. So I looked at David, and he looked at me, and okay, we better get married then. Very literal. We married. We had sex, I think, 4 times. We made 4 children. And if you don't know about how to make that happen, I guess we should talk about that privately, or you could ask somebody. It's not difficult, actually. Over time, it was really quite clear to me that David's values and how he thought about family life and children were quite different to mine. He was brought up one amongst 7. I think he had 7 sisters or 6 sisters, and or was it 4 sisters and 3 brothers? Anyway, there were more girls than boys. The girls had their role and they did the domestic stuff. The boys got the firewood, picked up the dung from the milk cart to go on the roses. I know this is a long time ago, probably even beyond some of your thinking about, because this was years and years and years ago. So there was a very different breakdown of roles, whereas I expected that David would help in the home and with the kids, and he wasn't equipped to do that. And eventually that non-cooperative lack of teamwork in our relationship caused that relationship to break down. When I was about 30, 31, I met Beatrice, and you can see her in the picture there. She was 20, and she joined me in the team, as in sharing of the load with our children, the children Dave and I had. And I, for the very first time in my life, understood what love was. And I loved this woman. And it was quite difficult because I didn't understand these feelings. I hadn't had them before. And as time went by, it became quite clear that the relationship Dave and I had broken down. And I went to a counsellor. As a Christian, I'm a Christian person, and I believed marriage was for life. And I said to the person, I don't know what to do. And she said to me, do you know you stink? I said, pardon me? You are carrying a dead relationship. And it stinks because death needs a respectable funeral. And a respectable funeral when it comes to relationships is divorce. She put it in such a way, because you know marriage vows, right? Till death us do part, and that relationship had died. So I then knew many years later, my kids were much older. Guy was 17, I think, when that divorce occurred. It's a long story. You can read about it in my book. I think, well, you can. There's a couple of books I've written that you can read about it in, if you want to know more. But it was putting together all those pieces to make sense. It's quite difficult as an autistic person. I'm very literal, took things very literally. But Beatrice stayed in our lives. She moved with us to Australia. We've been now together for 37 years. A very different story to the one that I was originally living. I certainly felt more male than female. Now this is quite confusing, isn't it? I loved being a mum. but I felt wrong as a woman. And okay, maybe you could say I loved being a parent. Maybe that's the right way to look at it. But I actually loved being a mum. I loved breastfeeding my babies. I loved everything about motherhood. Not the wearing of female clothing, didn't like that. Not the expectation on some issues around being female, but just being a mum. I was very uncomfortable shopping for clothes in the women's department of a store. So in fact, I didn't do it. I shopped in the men's. I was certainly uncomfortable in the public ladies' toilet. I remember thinking, someone's going to come up to me in a minute. They're going to say, oh, you're in the wrong place. But I didn't understand why. Or loads and loads of feelings that I couldn't put together, couldn't knit into the appropriate garment at that time. So I've been different forever, so it's felt. Ever since I can remember, I felt different. Different to the non-autistic people, different to the supposed gender that I was supposed to be, different to other members of my family, which is very interesting, feeling an alien in your own family, because their likes, their values, their things that my family, my family I grew up in, my parents and siblings, was so different to mine. I loved books, smelling them, stacking them, piling them up, setting them in rows, putting them on the shelf, putting them in color-coded order before I could read. Always loved books, and the rest of my family are not at all studious. So that was all quite strange. I was very much a tomboy. I loved, dear me, motorbikes and engines, piston engines, sports like tennis and soccer, a whole heap of things which weren't very ladylike. I used to practice lowering my voice, walking like a guy, peeing standing up. Peeing standing up as a girl, I don't recommend. Yep, straight down the legs. That's not useful. But I kept thinking, I better get it right at one time. I denied female puberty. When it happened at the age of 10, I tried to keep my chest as flat as possible because I sort of thought I'll grow up out of this, but I never did. Maybe you have children like this. Maybe your kids are doing similar things. If you get to know us, listen to us, watch us, you'll spot some of the signs that possibly the child that you have also has gender dysphoria and not just autism. So I was different in so many ways. Now, this is potentially really dramatically dangerous because of the statistics that I'll mention later of mental health and suicide. Eventually, we got divorced, and Beatrice and I formed a partnership, and we've now been together for 37 years. She was 28 when she migrated to us from Europe to be with me full time. At first, well, we're two women, we must be gay. At that time, there didn't seem any other way, any alternative. I didn't have language for anything else. But we never felt like we really fitted into the gay community. When we were with other lesbian women, it really felt strange. And I thought, well, it's just our autism, because we're both autistic. We did get married in the UK in 2007 because, well, actually, I think that was forming a civil partnership at that particular event. But to us, it was getting married. Now, if you form a civil partnership, you get a white certificate, and you're allowed to do almost everything, the same as married people. Not quite. So when they changed the law, oh dear, I don't remember when it was. It might have been like 2012 or something. I don't know. Can't remember. I should know these things. But we were allowed to upgrade our civil union. We were allowed to swap that for a marriage certificate. We got a green marriage certificate and all the benefits that go with being a married couple, because I transitioned into being a man. And so the equity wasn't there beforehand. The equality wasn't there beforehand. Suddenly it was made available to us, which is wrong. It shouldn't be like this. But there we go. That's where we're at in the world today. My lovely Beatrice is with me still. Concepts of normality. Human beings feel safe in what they experience as familiar. This mistakenly becomes what is normal. Normal for you may not be normal for me. So this is a problematic term. Okay, you think about your normal coffee. Latte, long black, short black, flat white, cappuccino. Which one of those is normal? Oh, they all are. Problematic term. I may now know my norm is in being male, but it took a lot of time and effort and appropriate steps and connections to build that understanding. So eventually I conformed my body to the norm of being male. At the moment you can't change your brain. As you probably know, gender identity is formed within the brain. So, maybe one day we'll be able to change the brain and keep the bodies we've got, who knows? But that's not how it is currently. So trans after 62 years and lots of life happenings, death of one of my sons, Maddie, moving house several times, returning to study and getting a PhD, being prominent in ex-gay leadership, I'm sorry to say. And I have put a statement up online to apologise for that. And church and being asked to leave church, owing to the fact that I loved a woman. All those things happened before I began to recognise that I was trans. So it's been a long journey and difficult one, and one that I've written about and Beatrice has written about, because her experience as a partner needed to be told too, because it's so tricky. I still think it tends to be easier for autistic people in some ways, because we don't seem to have those same gender expectations. We're not so binary in general. So sharing the news, talking to my partner was very difficult. In fact, she was horrified. Eventually agreeing to support me, but not without many tears and pleadings. The first step was to get appointments with psychologists, gender psychologists, and psychiatrists. Now, this was very difficult because I'm an autistic person and I have a previous mental history diagnosis of schizophrenia. I am not schizophrenic, but that was what was down as a 17-year-old when they didn't understand my behaviour. So psychiatrists were really reluctant. Usually you'll have maybe 3 sessions with a gender psychiatrist and they can make up their mind about you. I had 8 months of connecting with a psychiatrist every month, and every month going over the same tests, the same arguments, and he was very reluctant to give me my diagnosis of living with gender dysphoria. So in the end we went to London and I saw a gender psychiatrist there, and he spent an hour and 20 minutes with me, and he said, "You are very definitely living as a gender dysphoric person, and the remedy is to transition from your cisgender female assigned at birth to being male, which is where you're at home." So there was lots of things to do once that happened. Changing my name on all these things: bank, medical records, tax, insurances, passport, subscriptions to various newspapers, bills. I mean, it's incredibly full on, a lot of work, but I never looked back. Once I knew who I was, I'd come home. You don't know you're home till you get there. Okay, I've said about seeing psychiatrists. The process of taking hormones to confirm my new gender identity, well, it's not new because it's always actually who I've always been. The first surgery, second surgery, subsequent surgeries, all of that took a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of travelling. I'm fortunate. Australia doesn't do these sorts of surgeries, so I had to travel overseas, but I was fortunate to be in the UK and to be able to get some of that surgery there, in a place where I'm familiar, because I was born in the UK, I grew up there, and it was lovely to be home as such. I have to be careful what I say, in the UK to do those things. And I miss the UK, and it's hard during these COVID times to not be able to travel. My suitcase is still packed. As soon as we can, we'll be over. So gender dysphoria, the incidence in autism is really high. The studies to date show that GD is more likely to impact autistic individuals than those in the non-autistic population. And there's you can look this one up, but we absolutely need to understand and be prepared with the right support. That means coming alongside, listening non-judgmentally, as you do in everything with autism, and getting to know us as people, not fearful of what the future will be if somebody decides as a teenager or preteen that they want to start exploring their gender. Just walk with us. About 99.5% of people preteen who believe they're not the gender they've been assigned at birth, after puberty, 99.5% continue in that same vein of thought. So very high statistic. And if you don't work with your child and walk alongside with them, the danger is you're going to lose that child's love, lose that child's respect, lose the child, and not wanting to relate to you as they get older, which you do not want to do. Walk with us. It's easier to walk with us and travel on the journey, and if you get to a point where they change their mind, fair enough. If you're on puberty blockers, which are really brilliant at buying everybody time, can give you 2 or 3 years to process and think about what to do next, slows everything down. They're not a final step, they're just an intermediate bridge while we process the information, sort out what's sensory, what's gender, what's autism, what's personality, what's what. It gives everybody time, so we shouldn't be scared of them. And when you're being handled in an appropriate manner with the proper professionals, everything is monitored to see what's happening for your young person, and it really is the way to go, in my opinion. And the research supports this too. Autism and gender variance, the research is showing up to 20%. In fact, I think it's much higher. Autistic individuals live with gender variance, gender dysphoria, and this population are very, very vulnerable. I know it's a difficult topic, but being difficult only means we need to be more supportive, not judgmental, listening to what the kids are saying. We want them to have a future. If we don't, the statistics on suicide are really high, 40%. It's very scary. We don't come back from suicide. There's no second chance here. So we need to take this seriously. Sam Rose, a young man, wrote for the Reframing Autism position paper, Reframing Autism as an agency here in Australia. A recent survey of LGBTQIA+ Australian youth found that 1 in 8 neurodivergent. So let me just say, neurodiversity means everybody in the entire world. We have biodiversity, we have neurodiversity, etc. All of that is for everybody. Autistic people, ADHD and so on, we're neurodivergent. We diverge away from the typical. So we're not neurodiverse, we are neurodivergent. So 1 in 8 neurodivergent and LGBTQIA+ young people, this is very high, reported a suicide attempt in the past year. More than 1 in 3 reported a suicide attempt in their lifetime. This rate is more than twice as high as LGBTQIA+ young people without a disability, and 5 times as high as the same age group who are neither LGBTQIA+ nor disabled. So that's incredibly high. We can't risk losing our kids. We need to support them. So what is helpful to autistics? Use identity first language rather than person first. Please use correct pronouns, even if you have to practice them. Please expect ability, not disability. Please cater for sensory dysphoria, under or overactive and in between. Please don't think we are not able because we might not speak. Please don't think we don't think because we might not talk. Speech and ability have nothing to do with each other. They are different things. Just find a different means to work with us that might not be speech related. iPads, TV, games, drama, music, there are so many other ways. Animals, so many other ways to relate to us that are supportive. Respect and believing in us. It's really hard to respect others if it's not first modelled by others toward us. We need to be respected so that we can know how to respect you. Respecting our autonomy means encouraging me, walking with me, not taking over. Negotiate is better than demanding. It's a much better way. Negotiation, especially in demand avoidant kids, works so much better. And autonomy, allowing us the choice, even if it's only between two things, Vegemite, Marmite, peanut butter, that kind of thing. Let me do for myself. Please don't always do things for me. It's so tempting, especially as a parent, to do everything for the kids because you run out of time. So plan with your young person. Have things mapped out. Have things that they can do, even if it starts the evening before. And overall, use their interest. Work within my passions or interests. We did a study in Louisville in the States where we looked at gamma. In your brain there are various brain waves that do different things. Alpha waves, beta waves, theta waves, and gamma waves. Now gamma they all operate at a different bandwidth, but gamma is that particular wave of understanding, information processing that makes sense of the bigger picture. So gamma is really important. What we found was that in autism in general, gamma is scattered. There's almost too much of it happening. This is really a strange way of putting it, but we had a young person, we did some experiments. We had the young people who were autistic and young people who weren't, and we talked about the young person with that young person of their interest. When they were relating to us around things of interest to them, gamma was on, gamma was working. For non-autistic people, when there was things they weren't interested in, gamma was really right up there blinking at us. Now, how do I explain this? I often use this example. If you're making pancakes, for example, you've got flour, maybe a bit of milk and water and some eggs, and you beat them together. Now, eggs do not look like flour, do not look like water or milk. They're all very different, but when beaten together, you cannot see the individual egg, the individual flour. If you do see it, you haven't beaten it well enough. So when gamma's doing its job, you cannot see it. When you take particular pictures of the brain, you don't see gamma because it's doing its job and it's blended into that batter of making sense of the world. But when we looked at autistic kids' brains, outside of being interested, there was gamma yelling at us. The brighter the colour on the picture that we're looking at is the activity that's going on. So if gamma was active and doing its job, you shouldn't see it. But we did see it. So this is exciting and this is really important. Interest in autism isn't just a nice thing. It's not just something that we have an obsession. It's actually the way we build connection. It's the way we learn. It's the way we make sense of things. It's what turns gamma on. So work within my passions or interests, please, because this will give me access in a whole different way. Sometimes in school, for example, and other places, they'll offer some kind of reward. Do your maths and then you can have your iPad. That's not okay. It will be better to use my iPad to do my maths, because then you've captured my interest and I'm learning at the same time. So it isn't just about a reward at the end of an event. It's about utilising passions all the way through the school curriculum, all the way through home, and what you're doing together as a family. I'm much more likely to want to be involved if my passions are triggered, my interests are triggered. So it's not a case of stopping the obsession. It's not an obsession, it's a passion, and we need to work with it. Now, people have said to me, what if the passions are not good and not healthy and they're not okay, there's usually a way to work through and find some of those positives. Even in, so for example, a young man, all he was interested in was Nazi war, criminals, anything Nazi. Oh dear, Second World War stuff. So there was lots of good things about that era. Hitler had a family, Hitler had a dog. There were lots of things we could locate and find that we could utilize his interests via, rather than being scared and turned off. Sex is another one. Guns and ammunition. They sound dark and awful, but you'd be surprised what they can lead to. An understanding of how machinery is put together, an understanding of where things are made and how they came to be. There's all sorts of things that can come from a seemingly bizarre, or it's not bizarre really, but dark interest. And people say we don't want to facilitate that, we don't want to encourage that. So find an element within that you can encourage. Find life and loveliness. The red poppy was the first thing to grow in the Second World War. After the First World War, red poppies are symbolic and tell us not to forget. So it's finding that red poppy amongst the deadness of what's around. Work with our passions. I've got lots of information on my YouTube channel, so you can check on the YouTube channel and you'll see little videos I've made, animations for kids and so on, about a number of things that will also explain and hopefully answer questions in ways that I might not have been able to at the moment. There's also more resources on my webpage, and these particular ones underneath are to do with anything to do with gender stuff, transitioning things, that will also answer questions for young people and adults alike. I think that might be the end of my talk. I'll just check.